Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
7:06 on O'Connor and Company, where we don't insult you by pretending we don't have an opinion, by pretending we don't have a dog in the fight, as it were. I point this out because the poor viewers of Good Morning America, if you're starting your day with Good Morning America, you still get George Stephanopoulos there pretending like he's unbiased, pretending like he's impartial. He's there hosting this morning. I had to check to see if they're going to let him on because, you know, he got TMZ, got him on the sidewalk, said, you know, do you think Biden's okay? And he said, I don't think he can serve 4 more years. And then afterwards had to, what, did he apologize?
He issued a statement just saying, I shouldn't have said it.
I shouldn't have been honest. I should have. See, that's the difference. Like, we'll be honest with you. And you can disagree with us, by the way. But we're not going to. Every single time George Stephanopoulos appears on ABC News as this impartial journalist, it insults the intelligence of every single viewer of that program.
And again, it is a complete rejection of the responsibility of the press to inform Americans. And if George Stephanopoulos, what he saw in that room,
of course,
was so bad that he thinks this man cannot.
That's right. It's like he's like a witness to a crime.
That's right.
We deserve to know what he thinks based on being in that room.
Yes.
He knows what happened off the air. He knows what happened when the cameras stopped rolling.
That is reporting.
Here's what happened. Here's what I saw. All right. Well, that said. Joining us right now is Robert Greenway. He's the director of the Center for National Security at the Heritage Foundation and a former deputy assistant to the president. Mr. Greenway, always good to speak with you, sir. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So the NATO summit is happening right now in D.C., and of course, I mean, to us, it means horrible traffic, and you just can't get around downtown. But I guess there's something else going on here, too. Is the entirety of NATO really about funding the Ukraine war effort at this point?
Well, unfortunately not. Like a lot of commitments, not every NATO member is approaching the conflict at their doorstep in the same way. So Ukraine is certainly the most important topic of conversation, the largest land war in Europe since the Second World War, and that for which NATO was essentially designed to prevent. All of them, again, are responding differently, looking for American leadership, and it has been lacking. And so there's no clear strategy for getting to conflict termination on favorable terms, and it has now become a horrific war of attrition.
President Biden, of course, is hosting this summit here in our town, and it comes at a time where his capabilities are in doubt, and the world leaders certainly not only see it from watching the news themselves, but they saw it firsthand when the president was in Europe a couple of weeks ago. That's sort of the elephant in the room. What do you think they're evaluating right now with Joe Biden?
Well, it is, I think, clear to them and to everyone, really, the debilitated state that the president is in. And again, at a time in which they are extremely concerned about Russian aggression, and for good reason, and there doesn't seem to be an end to the conflict, and the risk spills over into a number of different areas. I think they're looking at the current circumstances with fear and with trepidation. And they're also mindful that there's an election in the United States, and some are concerned about what President Trump may or may not do. Others, I think, are confident in the fact that at least there's a vision for ending the conflict, and President Trump may have the best odds of doing it, and I think that's right.
We're just speaking of Ukraine. Apparently, Vladimir Zelensky was speaking at the Ronald Reagan Institute, and I'm going to quote him here because the audio is sort of fuzzy from a cell phone. But he said, and I'm quoting, "Now everyone is waiting for November. Americans are waiting for November," obviously alluding to our election. "Putin awaits November too, killing, destroying, preparing for whatever November might bring." What do you think he means by that? Is he sort of trying to influence the way people vote based on how he believes Putin wants it to end up?
Well, I think he's certainly trying to make the case that Ukraine needs, unequivocal support from the United States and from NATO, and that his objectives, of course, are to restore territorial integrity before the 2014 invasion, which is essentially to resume control over all of Ukraine including parts of the Crimea that were taken in 2014. So I think he's making the case as best he can, but I think he also appreciates the fact that, President Trump has been public about pursuing immediate conflict termination. I think he's concerned about the terms in which that would take place. But at the end of the day, I think it's important for everyone to pursue the end of this conflict. And certainly I think President Trump has been probably the most vocal about doing so.
In fact, President Trump said that he would begin putting an end to it if he were elected in November. Even before the inauguration, he would put the wheels in motion. Could you give us some insight as to what that might entail, what that might look like?
It's difficult to say, but what I would envision are two things. First is real economic pressure has to be brought to bear against Russia. Right now, their economy is growing. Their economy GDP grew by 3.6% last year, which is better than just about every other European country, better than the United States. That's unsustainable. You can't enter into a conflict with a country and allow its economy to regenerate combat power, as has been the case. It's enjoying record oil exports. So real economic pressure has to be the first order of business. The second is there has to be a credible military threat against Russia's interests in the region. Either that'll be done implicitly or explicitly by the provision of additional arms and equipment or the threat of doing so. Under those conditions, I think with resolve and credibility from an American president, I think that you can get to negotiations and end it on terms favorable to the United States and to NATO.
We're speaking with Robert Greenway of Heritage Foundation, a former deputy assistant to the president, talking about national security issues with NATO in town. I found it remarkable that Joe Biden, in his remarks yesterday, sort of bragged about the fact that when he took office, something like 4 or 5 of the NATO nations were fulfilling their obligation for their gross domestic product, 2% going to their military and defense. Now it's something over 20 nations. Is that really something that President Biden initiated, or that sounds like something that Donald Trump insisted on?
Well, two things. First, President Trump, in ways I think that they didn't fully appreciate, but he was effective at getting them to spend more and commit more to their defense. And second, I don't think President Biden can claim credit because in the end, he failed to deter a Russian invasion of Ukraine, which brought conflict to the doorstep and really raised defense spending as a response to it. So it's a crisis almost manufactured or certainly allowed by President Biden that resulted in the increased defense spending. But look, it's still not anywhere near where it needs to be. NATO's population since 1955 has grown by 953 million people, but they have 6 million less people serving in their military. Their GDP grew by $40 trillion, and yet they're spending half as much as they did in the 70s. And so there's a long way for Europe to go. And they also spent $340 billion, European Union nations did in 2023 on climate initiatives, and only $240 billion on defense. So there is a clear mismatch of priorities that needs to take place, and I would expect President Trump would hold them to account.
And finally, Mr. Greenway, back to the traffic problems and the gridlock. I'm told that these European leaders are really concerned about, climate change and carbon emissions. Shouldn't they just take the bus to all these events, and back to the embassy? Seriously.
Well, for those of us that commute in Washington, we certainly would wish that they would do so. There's always been a disconnect between what people say and what people do. Climate is probably the most egregious.
It is. And all the carbon emissions that we're inhaling while we're at a red light waiting for the motorcade to go by. Just stop it all. All right, I'll stop ranting at you. I know it's not your fault, Robert. Thank you, sir. Tell our friends at Heritage we said hi.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
7:50.
For all your glass, mirror, and shower door needs, visit DullasGlass.com. Dullas Glass. Love your glass.
On the next Vince Colonnese show, the big story that the media absolutely refuses to tell you about today, we've got it 3 o'clock here on WMAL.
Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, who is still in the running, it appears, to be President Trump's running mate. We'll see how that pans out over the next several days. He signed an executive order yesterday calling for public schools to restrict or eliminate cell phone use in classrooms. He cited poor youth mental health as the reason. And you like this?
Oh, I love this. This is wonderful. My kids attend schools where there's no cell phone policies, private schools, obviously. I think this is fantastic. I think it is long overdue. I think this should be a nationwide policy. Cell phones have no place in schools. And there are some varied kind of in some schools, You can't have it out during, in class. But then, the teacher is constantly having to sort of badger the kids if they take it out of their backpack and look at it. We've all seen kids sort of stealthily check their phone. I don't see this as just a parent rights bill and good for students. I see it as a pro-teacher bill because, again, teachers are there to teach. I have a lot of problems with public school teachers, but what they don't need is the added burden of having to badger students to put their phones away. They're there to teach, and kids should be there to pay attention.
My gut is with you on this. My instinct is with you as well.
I can tell there's a butt coming.
A big butt. Like a Kardashian-sized butt. Are you going to say
it's the parents' role to take away the phones?
No. But I appreciate you mocking me in such a demeaning and patronizing way. No, actually, I'm only a little suspicious about this because some of the egregious things that we've learned about what goes on in our schools right now happened during COVID when we had cameras in the classroom and the teachers were teaching and we were able to look over our kids' shoulders, and also from students surreptitiously recording their teachers. Okay. And if the teachers know that there's no danger of them being recorded and going viral for their anti-American rants that they promulgate in the classroom, then I think that they'll be freer to do so.
Yeah. It's a good point.
And I like the accountability that a student with a phone brings to the table because any teacher at any given moment will get caught with their typical.
Look, that is a great point. I apologize for mocking you earlier.
I
do.
I'm glad that our listeners could have a little insight into what I deal with when the microphones are turned off.
You're going to tell Heather to clip that section. I apologize. Right. It's going to be your ring, your phone ring. And my husband's too. I agree with that. But this is the thing. It is not 2020. It's 2024. We know they're doing it. We already know they're doing it. And yes, those viral videos do help. But cat's out of the bag. We know that teachers and public schools have largely become centers for indoctrination and social services centers. We get it. We know it. And there's a lot of work being done. But I do think that phones in the classroom are ultimately a harm. They harm kids. They distract kids. They keep kids from listening to what the teacher is trying to do. And look, these phones are addictive, and we know this, and we know that some of these social media platforms are harmful. Get them off the phones.
Meanwhile,
and good job to Youngkin for doing that. I forgot the point of the segment.
Sure, absolutely. And I listen again on the whole. I think now this is an executive order. It's guidance. It's instruction. I think that individual school boards still have the opportunity to sort of make this up. And maybe this is like a reverse psychology thing. Like, knowing the school boards here in Northern Virginia, whatever Youngkin tells them to do, they'll do the opposite.
Well, for the reasons you just mentioned, they might be totally pro this. They're going to be like, hey, get those phones.
That's right.
Those phones have gotten us in a lot of trouble.
Meanwhile, Axios has an article here. Headline, "Don't stress about kids' screen time," leading pediatrician says. Don't get hysterical about your child's screen time or yank away their cell phone protectively, says Dr. Michael Rich, the pediatrician who runs a leading treatment program for kids with so-called internet addictions, a term he detests. He says children will go through life with a smartphone, he points out, and it's important for the adults in their lives to teach them to use one wisely, which I think that there's some wisdom to that. See, the problem is not the phone. The problem is Snapchat. The problem is Instagram. The problem is the apps that they're using to deteriorate their lives. Yeah. But the actual device itself is not the problem.
We also need to change the culture. Look, the bottom line is I'm all for parental control over these things. And when kids go home, you need to limit their screen time. But the fact that kids are not going to have access to their phones in school will help change the culture and will convey to kids, look, there's a time and a place for phones. School ain't it, kids. And then when kids go home, you say, you know what, kids, I'm taking your phone at 8, or I'm taking your phone. You're never allowed to bring your phone to dinner. You're never allowed to bring your phone in the car. Parents can set those standards, but I think that is a great message to send to kids when you take them out of schools.
It is 7:20.
Now. On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
7:37 on O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in here today to this glorious and hot Wednesday in your nation's capital. Speaking of hot, Julie Gunlock's here.
Oh, God,
all morning
please.
long. sizzling. And then at 8:35, we're going to be talking to John Levine. He is a New York Post reporter. He's the one who sort of looked at the White House visitor log
Broke
and
the
said,
story.
hey, this neurologist.
This is weird. 9 times.
We'll talk to John about that and whether he's had any fallout from that story. That's coming up. Julie, can we hate the mainstream legacy left-wing partisan media any more than we already do?
I have reached peak hate at
Well,
this point.
Then get ready for this.
Yeah.
Jim Inhofe, who was the senator from Oklahoma since 1994. In fact, when he retired, he had been the longest-serving active senator at that time, 94 to 2014, I want to say, when he stepped down. Maybe even later. Actually, it was later.
I think it was.
To 2022, I think, actually. Anybody who ever worked with Jim Inhofe tells you what a good gentleman he was. Please, I only had encounters with him at the airport, and he was amazing.
Well, look at it's
Great
Oklahoma.
Guy. It's Oklahoma.
I mean, gosh,
That's
the nicest people in America. He was such a kind, soft-spoken, incredibly polite to staffers, always very gentle, never, ever, and I have witnessed some yelling.
Yeah.
Okay. I never saw him act aggressive with his staff. Incredibly competent. The research that he and his staff did on these really tough climate change issues, but really a phenomenal man. Really.
Oklahoma, an oil state.
Yep.
And obviously he believes that America should be energy independent.
Yes.
And he spent a lot of time protecting the oil industry that is a big part of the economy in Oklahoma.
That's his job.
By challenging.
Yes.
The dubious science behind many of the items that are part of the climate change agenda.
Yep.
So here's CNN's headline.
gross.
CNN, former Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma, a climate change denier, and ex-Armed Services Committee chairman dies at 89. Associated Press, breaking GOP Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma, known for backing military and denying that climate change is human-made, dies at 89.
These people. It's disgusting.
AP headline. That was the tweet from it. Here's the headline. Former U.S. Senator Jim Inhofe, defense hawk, who called human-caused climate change a hoax.
As it is.
Dies at 89. They have summed up a man's entire life and legacy.
Politico Pro. Senator Jim Inhofe, who called climate change a hoax, did he name same thing?
This is, it's some 22-year-old Wellesley grad with a journalism degree and a minor in climate justice.
Again, it's
decides to write these headlines.
Right. Yes, but again, it is just you look at them all: HuffPost, New York Times, Politico Pro, all of the AP, all of them are the same. They all put in comma climate change denier, said climate change was a hoax, comma dies. They have to have that modifier in there. They cannot help themselves. And again, they're all the same. All groupthink.
Washington Post, Jim Inhofe, Oklahoma senator and climate change denier, dies at 89. Also, Washington Post, when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, mass murderer.
We need to say that
when he died.
Does. Allah Baghdadi.
Austere religious scholar at helm of Islamic State, dies at 48. Austere. He was austere in the way he, inspired mass suicide bombings that killed Americans and left them without limbs. But this is the media that we have right now. I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't complain about it.
I love how, the Washington Post actually read, as leader of Baghdadi led the Islamic State wars against Iraq and Syria. Baghdadi directed the use of controversial tactics like mass suicide bombings. Say, comma, including the mass use of suicide bombings and execution of prisoners of war. Controversial tactics.
Your one man's controversial tactic is another man's heinous war crime.
One man's controversial tactic is another one's suicide bombing.
Yes.
I mean,
so a suicide bombing is a controversial tactic, but to challenge the orthodoxy behind climate change, which, by the way, how many deadlines have they given us? Since you roll back the tape to Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, because by now we would all be underwater in Washington, D.C.
Greta, AOC,
constantly.
We would all be dead by now.
And daring to say, hey, maybe you guys don't have a clear grasp on the science here, you know? No, you're a denier. You're a climate change denier.
Yep.
And that's your entire legacy. And, they say that history books are written by the victors, but that's actually not true. The history books are written by historians who are often people like this. People like this who don't win at anything, actually. They're not the victors who write these history books or write these obituaries or write these headlines and define a man's legacy. They're activists. And they're not victors at all. They're losers who couldn't actually do anything. Jim Inhofe actually accomplished things in his life and leaves an incredible legacy of public service behind him. And the person who writes the headline or obituary for the Associated Press will amount to nothing.
Yes, and if you want to look at the state of sort of scholarship and historic scholarship in this country, you just need to look at Michael Beschloss. He is completely insane at this point and so radically leftist. So you're right. Sadly, history is being written by these people.
The good news here is...
Yes, give me some good news.
Jim Inhofe would laugh at this hysterically.
He would.
He would love this, actually. Because here's the bottom line. If you're Jim Inhofe, or if you're Rush Limbaugh, or if you're Donald Trump, or if you're us at this point.
You read those headlines and you go...
That's right.
Yes, good. I'm glad you fought back against the climate change hysteria.
Exactly. Yeah. And the last people you're trying to impress with your life's work is a reporter who is assigned to write an obituary at the Associated Press or CNN. So God bless you, Jim Inhofe. You did something right. Big news out of Gotham. Boy, you talk about cutting-edge technology. You take the Acela Express up there to Manhattan, and you're about to get introduced to something that absolutely will blow your mind. Take it away, Mayor Eric Adams. He made the big announcement yesterday. This is going to change everything.
Welcome to our trash revolution, and we all have one unified dislike, and those are those pesky New York City rats. They're getting more and more bold. They no longer run from you. They just hang out and just do what they want. Buildings with 1 to 9 residential units will be required to put their trash into wheelie bins like this one here. They will be required to make sure that they're sealed. These are durable. They are attractive, and New York affordable.
That's right. New York has introduced to the world the concept of the trash can.
Yes, you might actually live like civilized people and throw your garbage in a trash can. You could also maybe tackle the rat problem. Instead of unveiling all these new trash cans, you could, rid the city of rats.
Kill the rats. Yeah, exactly. I will say, though, this will help. And if you've been to New York, it's ridiculous when you walk down the street and you see just piles of garbage stacked
People are animals
in their bags, and it stinks.
Yeah,
and
if you can smell the trash over the smell of pot, it's gross.
And urine. Let's
and
not
vomit,
forget that.
And vomit.
It's New York.
Yeah.
So was actually mocked quite a bit, Eric Adams was, for acting like they've invented the wheel.
Yeah, New York City used to produce skyscrapers and the Brooklyn Bridge, and now they produce trash cans.
Trash cans.
Wow.
I got to say, though, and I hate people who do this, but there is a better way when you're living in a big city.
Move?
Last summer, I vacationed and spent a day in Bordeaux.
You've been dying to bring
this up. I really have been.
How are you going to segue into this from New York trash cans? Go ahead.
Meredith and I were sitting at a cafe. We were having a nice dinner, drinking some rosé. And this garbage truck comes by. And, the city, you could eat off the sidewalk.
Sure.
The city was so beautiful and so clean. And this garbage truck, do you know that in Bordeaux, France, they have 3 daily trash pickups? And the wheelie bins go out there, and so there's no even. Stop looking at me like that. There is not even
Larry
a hint
O'Connor,
of trash.
The French are better. I never thought I would hear that from Larry O'Connor.
That if a city wants to make this a priority, they can do it. They just have to make that commitment and make it a priority and say, okay, you know what? We're not going to tolerate trash anymore. We want our city to be pretty. We want it. Disney figures out how to do it.
Yes.
They hire people to go in and the second you drop something on the ground on Main Street, USA, man, there's a dude there with a broom that's, I got to fire, right? It's like, make the commitment. If you want to do it, you can do it. Cities like these Democrat-run dystopias, they have never made it a priority, so that's why they go to hell.
Well, listen, okay, French.
Did I mention I went to Bordeaux?
Yes, I know. The gratuitous mention of Bordeaux aside, I agree with you, and I said that earlier that just unveiling new garbage cans doesn't he should tell people maybe put the garbage in the garbage
He
can.
actually did demonstrate it for the press guy. He showed people how to put the bag of garbage in the wheelie bin and then high-five.
I'm just a stupid American.
I
haven't been to Bordeaux.
When Giuliani became mayor, he made it a priority to arrest the homeless,
Yes,
get them into shelters, or you're going to
broken
jail.
glass theory.
Clean up the
Yep.
graffiti. And if
Yep.
you're caught doing graffiti, you're going to jail.
Right.
Guess what? The city got beautiful. Guess what? People started investing in the city.
Yeah.
Businesses moved there. People moved there. Developers built there.
And it conveyed a message from police and from the city itself to criminals. You're not going to get away with this
We
anymore.
won't tolerate it. And, so welcome to Western civilization, New York City, by getting rid of those bags.
Vacation again?
Bordeaux. It's 7:54.